Witness the glory, the chaos, the rise and fall of Europe.
You know, when a great empire collapses, we tend to think about endings. The end of order, the end of an era, maybe even the end of the world as they knew it. But history, well, it's rarely that simple. What if the fall of a civilization isn't really a full stop? What if it's the violent, messy, and incredibly creative start of something brand new? And that's the huge question we're really digging into here. The end of the Western Roman Empire was way more than just some event in ancient history. It was like a stress test for an entire civilization. It forced the people of a whole continent to ask a terrifying question. When the government, the laws, even the roads that connect your world just fall apart, what do you build to replace them? Okay, let's dive in. So first things first, we have to kind of adjust how we see this whole thing. The popular image of the fall of Rome, it's all fire and barbarians crashing through the gates. But the reality, it was so much slower, so much more complicated. It wasn't like a building getting demolished overnight. It was more like a grand old house just slowly, piece by piece, falling into ruin over generations. Now, what's so fascinating when you look at a timeline like this is just how long this took. That famous date, 476, when the last emperor was basically forced into retirement, that's just the final chapter in a very long book. The whole process really kicked off centuries earlier with something called the crisis of the 3rd century, just a perfect storm of plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Then in 395, the empire officially splits into two, which leaves the West much poorer and more vulnerable. And the sack of Rome in 410? Wow, that was a huge psychological blow. The eternal city wasn't eternal after all. So you see, 476 wasn't the day the light suddenly went out. It was just the moment when everyone had to finally admit the power had been flickering for a very, very long time. So the key here is to look past that dramatic image of chaos and ruin. The real story is the unwinding of the systems that made Rome, well, Rome. The tax system just stopped working. The army pretty much dissolved. The trade networks that crisscrossed the empire, they frayed and then just snapped. It was this slow, messy, complicated process of decay that happened over lifetimes. So let's move on and see what grew in its place. As that central Roman authority just evaporated, a totally new political map started to take shape. The once unified empire was tore apart and then kind of stitched back together into this patchwork of brand new local kingdoms. To really get your head around how huge this change was, you have to appreciate what was lost. The Roman Empire gave people this incredible sense of unity. I mean, think about it. A merchant in Britain, a soldier in Syria, and a politician in Rome were all part of the same system. They answered to the same emperor, were governed by the same written laws, and were connected by amazing roads. It was one enormous, interconnected world. In this slide, wow, it just lays out the shift perfectly. Roman power was this big, abstract, bureaucratic thing. Some official you'd never meet collected your taxes, sent them to a faraway capital to pay for a professional army. But the new kind of power? It was intensely personal. It was all about your direct, sworn loyalty to a local warlord who led a band of warriors who followed him because they chose to. And that idea of a single written law for everyone, that gave way to this whole mess of local, unwritten tribal customs. Basically, the state was replaced by the warband. So who were these new guys in charge? Well, they were the leaders of Germanic groups who had been living on the edges of the empire for centuries, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as allies. Now they were the new bosses. The Franks, under their king Clovis, carved out a kingdom in Gaul, which is basically the beginning of modern France. You had the Visigoths setting up in Spain, the Ostrogoths in Italy, and the Angles and Saxons sailing over to Britain. Right here, in the rubble of the Roman world, the very foundations of modern European nations were being laid. But okay, that's the big picture politics. What did all of this actually mean for an ordinary person, like a farmer or a craftsman? Well, for most people, the biggest change was economic. Their entire world got smaller, tougher, and incredibly local. The grand stage of empire was gone, replaced by the day-to-day drama of just trying to survive. Just think about the domino effect. The trade routes that brought grain from Egypt and pottery from North Africa all across the Mediterranean, they just fell apart. The big workshops that churned out mass-produced stuff were replaced by local artisans making things just for their neighbors. The cities, which had been these buzzing hubs of trade and government, they shrank, some to the point of being ghost towns. And without a common currency everyone could trust, doing business over long distances became almost impossible. The globalized economy of the Roman world just seized up. This is such a powerful way to think about it, isn't it? It really brings it down to a human level. Your world was no longer this gigantic empire connected by roads and ships. It was your village, the fields around it, and maybe the market in the next town over. That was it. Your entire life just contracted into this tiny, familiar circle. And out of this new, fractured local world, a new economic system had to emerge. We call it manorialism. And really, it was a pretty simple and often harsh bargain. In a dangerous world with no police or armies to protect you, a local strongman, a lord with his own fighters, offered protection from bandits and raiders. And in return, peasants were tied to his land, working it for him, and giving him a big chunk of everything they grew. It was a defensive system built not for wealth, but for pure survival. So political unity was gone. Economic unity was shattered. In this broken world, was there any force left that could tie people together? Well, the answer is yes. There was one institution that didn't just survive the collapse of Rome, but actually grew stronger because of it, filling the massive vacuum that Rome left behind: the Christian Church. The Church stepped up in 3 absolutely crucial ways. First, it preserved learning. As the ability to read and write faded pretty much everywhere else, you had these monasteries, often in the middle of nowhere, acting like little lifeboats of knowledge. Monks there painstakingly copied not just the Bible, but also the great works of Roman and Greek thinkers. Second, they provided social structure. With Roman officials gone, it was often the local bishop who became the de facto mayor, organizing food supplies and settling disputes. And third, maybe the most important of all, the Church gave everyone a new shared identity. You might be a Frank, or a Goth, or a Saxon, but you are all part of one single spiritual family, Christendom. And this quote here from Cassiodorus, he was a Roman official who saw the end of the empire and then became a monk. It just perfectly captures the new way of thinking. The Roman way was to understand the world through reason and law and engineering, but the new medieval mindset, it was all about understanding the world through faith. If you could understand God, you could understand everything he created. Okay, so now we can start to pull all these different threads together. This whole period, which people love to call the Dark Ages, was nothing of the sort. It wasn't an empty space between 2 great eras. It was a crucible, a time of intense pressure and heat, where the raw ingredients of a brand new civilization were being fused together. I love thinking about it like this, like a recipe for medieval Europe. It was this totally unique blend. You start with the powerful leftovers of Rome, its language, its ideas about law, and that powerful, lingering memory of a single great empire. Then you mix in the energetic culture of the Germanic peoples, their warrior traditions, their focus on personal loyalty, and their new languages. And finally, you bind it all together with the glue of the Christian faith and the structure of the Church. And that, right there, is the most important thing to take away from all this. The centuries after Rome's fall weren't just a story of decline and loss. They were a period of radical, often violent, but ultimately creative transformation. It was the slow, difficult process of remaking a world into something that wasn't Roman and wasn't barbarian, but was something completely new: Europe. And that's the thought I want to leave you with. When we look at the world today, at the languages we speak, the borders on the map, the very foundations of Western civilization, we're looking at a direct inheritance from this period of collapse and rebirth. It makes you rethink the words we use, doesn't it? What we so often call the darkness might just be the shadow cast by the incredibly bright fire of a new world being forged.